Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, also known as CTE, is a progressive degenerative disease of the brain found in athletes with a history of repetitive brain trauma, including symptomatic concussions as well as asymptomatic subconcussive hits to the head. So in this picture, you can see how the control group displays little evidence of the protein called tau, which is responsible for CTE. In the NFL 1 group, players with a few years of experience show more signs of the protein in their brains, but not nearly to the extent of the NFL 3 group of players that have played full careers and have progressive CTE.
So I picked CTE because I have played football my entire life, and it is relevant to anyone who participates not only in football, but in any contact sport. CTE has also been known to affect boxers since the 1920s. However, recent reports have been published of neuropathologically confirmed CTE in retired professional football players and other athletes who have a history of repetitive brain trauma. It's also important for people to understand the effects that CTE has on the brain because 55% of students play a high school sport, and anywhere between 3 and 11% of those kids will go on to play a sport in college. This picture represents head injuries in sports per 10,000 games and practices, and as most would expect, football is the top sport that people are subjected to head injuries, and the least common is volleyball.
The typical brain with CTE will have a reduced brain volume, particularly in the frontal and temporal lobes. This reduction is associated with enlarged ventricles or fluid-filled brain cavities. Reduced blood flow and, eventually, atrophy to several key brain regions, including the amygdala and hippocampus, likely explains the physical and personality changes associated with the disease. A view under the microscope reveals neuron loss, beta amyloid peptide, and neurofibrillary tangles formed with deposits of tau protein, cornerstones of our current knowledge of Alzheimer's. Pro Football Hall of Famers Tony Dorsett, Joe DeLaMelure, and former NFL All-Pro Leonard Marshall have been diagnosed as having signs of CTE.
Dorsett, Marshall, and DeLaMelure are among the 4,500 plus plaintiffs in a class action lawsuit filed against the NFL that is in the midst of being settled for $765 million. The plaintiffs argued that for years the NFL had concealed a link between playing football and brain damage. As part of the settlement reached in August, the NFL did not admit to any wrongdoing. The symptoms of CTE include memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, impulse control problems, aggression, depression, anxiety, suicidality, Parkinsonism, and eventually progressive dementia. These symptoms often begin years or even decades after the last brain trauma or end of active athletic involvement. And while there is no known cure for CTE, hope may be offered in the form of treatment of concussions themselves. CTE can be attributed to successive concussions sustained over an NFL player's career. A concussion is defined as a minor traumatic brain injury that may occur when the head hits an object, or a moving object strikes the head. It can affect how the brain works for a while. A concussion can lead to a bad headache, changes in alertness, or loss of consciousness. In the case of a concussion, the body begins a courageous repair fight, sending specialized immune cells from the blood and the brain to patch in and fill the frayed membranes. But the process isn't always quick enough, allowing an excess of free radicals to enter through the weakened membranes and travel into the brain tissue, where they soon create the death of brain cells not even near the original impact site. While this is disturbing, the development also sparks an opportunity for the possibility of treatment to scientists. If they can lessen the number of free radicals coming together near the brain, they can reduce the consequential damage. In follow-up experiments, scientists inserted large amounts of a powerful antioxidant into the space between a mice's skull and brain. Antioxidants soak up free radicals, and it turns out dramatically blunts the trauma associated with impacts to the brain. In the mice that received the treatment immediately after the concussion, almost 70% fewer brain cells died than in the untreated mice.
Taking these stories into account, it makes one realize the importance of individual health and how it is essential to take care of yourself. God calls on us to be good stewards of our bodies, and that includes protecting your brain from traumatic impacts that can negatively affect your health later on in life. Now, I'm not saying don't play football or any other contact sport, but at the same time we need to be looking at how we're playing those sports and the precautionary steps we're taking in order to protect ourselves from further brain damage and so that we may live long, healthy lives.